Today in News Tech, the BBC tops 20 million followers on Instagram. Seattle Times hits 81,000 digital subscribers without deep discounting, and how to capture and use audience segments to improve engagement. Okay, so this top story this week is on the BBC News and how they've grown to be the most popular Instagram channel for, I think, news organizations in the world with 20 million Instagram followers. And this article from our friends at the Press Gazette goes into an interview with Jeremy Skeet over at BBC and just his strategy behind social media, why he decided to stay away from TikTok and focus exclusively on Instagram. And we'll see there's some really practical tips that he brings to the table and advising people on how to choose which platforms to focus on and how to make the most of those platforms.
The BBC's Instagram success. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today we're highlighting a piece by Charlotte Tobit over at Press Gazette about the BBC crossing 20 million followers on Instagram. The article, How BBC News Top 20 Million Instagram Followers and Why It Has Stayed Away from TikTok, examines the news outlet's approach to the social platform, including the decision to not expend energy on rival TikTok. We've got an incredibly strong reputation on which we build, but, crucially, we contribute to that strong reputation as well, and it will only continue to exist with the type of great content that the social team are driving towards and our digital journalism provides as well, said Amy Fox, executive digital editor for BBC News. Here are the highlights from the BBC's Instagram strategy. Laser-like focus on the audience. Regular posting. Creating more explainers, especially in relation to COVID-19. Using text on images. The BBC did not pursue these strategies on rival platform TikTok as the audience demographics does not coincide with the editorial content of BBC News. To facilitate expanding our customers' social media presence, Our Hometown provides a social media auto-post feature allowing for automated posts of news content onto any of the major platforms.
Nice animation at the end, by the way, Chris. I really like
thanks.
that. So I'm going to just look at this digest article here and go through these points. So applying this to the local newspaper publisher, these lessons, laser-like focus on the audience. Let's just break down these four. What did they mean by that?
A lot of times when we look at the term laser-like focus on the audience, we might be thinking something along the lines of demographics,
right,
and things like that. But I believe that what the BBC strategy is to use their editorial reputation to make sure they're focused to maintain that with the audience that they're targeting with this particular platform, Instagram.
Right.
But I would say that for our customers, it should mean a little something different because they're not such a big news outlet. That laser-like focus on the audience could be more content focused instead of reputationally focused. I mean, if you're in the community, you've got your reputation built over the years, a laser-like focus on the audience means you're just giving them what they want. So if you're going to be covering certain stories on Instagram because you want to attract maybe some of the younger demographics in your community, covering sports events, live events, parades, any of these kind of things where a short form video Instagram might be a valid way and an engaging way of getting people to know that your coverage is there, and through whatever machinations you want to put together, get them to know about your site and come get more content from your site is the end goal, of course.
I mean, one thing, laser-like focus on the audience. So this is all in the context of choosing Instagram to focus on over TikTok, or, to do TikTok and Instagram.
In the case of the BBC, absolutely. Yeah, they just feel that their type of content really was served by the TikTok platform. It serves a completely different type of content and a different type of audience.
It is a different type of audience. I think it would be fair to say that they are the two contenders for the youngest audience. So if you could think of it like they're trying to reach a younger audience, they want to add one platform. They decided Instagram because
Amy Fox, the executive digital editor, used the word mature.
That's what I was looking for. That's the perfect word.
To define it as opposed to TikTok, which is a bit more up and coming.
That's right. Heard a lot about TikTok. There's certainly big numbers that people are chasing there, but it's really about connecting with the audience in the most effective way possible. So let's look at their account and just talk about some specific examples. There's a couple things going on here. We've got the posts, video posts, but then you've also got image posts. And that's not really an option on TikTok. It's not a practical. You could have a video that's just a still image, but people don't really do this on TikTok. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit in there. So they want to put out this type of content that's like a storyboard of an article. So they can tell the story in a series of images or a series of images with text on them. That's how it's most commonly done. Here's just a one sentence headline, more details. Oh, interesting. You got a little animation. The point is that it's a mix of still and video. A platform that works well with static images is a good option for newspapers because a lot of your content is just images. So you could take a featured image from an article and then just take the headline and superimpose it on the image. There's two levels of putting text on the images too. We should probably talk about, right? You can do that in Adobe and create the image and it's a flat image with the text in it. Or you could put the text as you're uploading it into Instagram. Have you experimented with that, Chris? I feel like you probably have on our platform.
I've looked at the options, but for me, it's just much more easy and have a lot more control just to do it in something like Photoshop. So I can control exactly how it looks.
Right.
But a lot of these platforms do offer annotation. Instagram's kind of like they used to have stickers a lot, but you can do some sort of visual composition on these. I would assume most of the time what BBC is doing is just creating those square images things because they're all very consistent in the presentation, not always the font, but the presentation of some sort of text, some sort of image, even on the videos, it seemed.
Well, the only thing that I would mention about this is just an accessibility thing. Because I think, I mean, Instagram, it's all about images, but if someone is using a screen reader on Instagram, it won't be able to read this text. It would be able to if it was embedded within the Instagram app and it was like a sticker, like you said. What the BBC News is doing, you can't just copy that. You got to look at why they made the decisions and then take that as a framework and apply it on your smaller publication. So creating these slideshows with text added in Photoshop requires a whole production team just for Instagram. And they do have those resources. So
they mentioned they have a 10-person team just for the Instagram account.
There you go. Right. So they're heavily invested in it. They made that decision based on maintaining the reputation and all that. But we're talking about the BBC. At the local newspaper, you don't need to do this. It's like the 80-20 rule. 20% of the effort to get 80% of the benefits. So just getting images out on social media, getting your brand out there, getting information to people, even if it's just a still image, that's the featured image, and the headline here is in the description. Obviously, this is optimal. This is something that we can work towards, but you don't need to say, I can't do Instagram because I can't do it like the BBC does it. I think we just want to take little bits from this and apply what we can.
We could say that the social media auto post feature has a lot of different options for how you want your content to appear on the target platform.
That's the bottom line point that I want to make here is that with regular posting, this second out of 4 key strategies that they applied, regular posting, that applies to every social network. That's just how they're built. They are designed to reward people that post the most and have the most engagement. So the only way to get into that category is to post as much as you can and, cast a wide net and hopefully get a lot of engagement on some or all of those posts. So our solution to that is automating that whole process. You turn on this plugin, social media auto posts, and every single article published on the website will be reformatted for the social media platforms. So it'll pull the featured image, put it on Instagram, put it on Twitter and Facebook, everything. I like this because it really plays into the platform agnostic approach of it. You don't need to create, like he talks about here, Jeremy Skeet, the social director, creating videos solely for TikTok. I think that's very insightful on his part. He didn't just take Instagram video and say, throw it up on TikTok too. He understands that TikTok is a totally different user experience. Users on there have different expectations. The types of stuff that goes viral on there, it's different than Instagram in a lot of ways. Know your audience and know the platform and the audience that is attracted to that platform, and make sure that there's overlap. Creating more explainers. We talked about that quite a bit with the images, where it's a slideshow of images rather than just a block of text under the image. I think that's interesting. Those are the key points there. As we've talked about before, we talked about with Damien, it's not like unlimited resources. You can't just be everywhere all the time. There is time involved in every social network for most people, especially these niche video ones. You kind of have to create it specifically for them. So think carefully about getting into it before you do. Any other comments on that one?
I would add that one benefit of using the social media auto post is you can actually, without a lot of additional effort, widen that net just to see which platforms are giving you better engagement, and then trim away the fat and just focus your energies on the ones that actually are performing.
That's a really interesting point. So you could start off Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Those are the big ones, and LinkedIn maybe, and just see at a starting point, you're going to have different audiences on each one. So you'll have to take that into consideration, but see how they perform on an automated level, and then pick the winner, and then just put more into that. Because the auto poster is just going to put up the text articles. If you have video content that maybe you're just putting on YouTube now, you could say, okay, let's run auto post for a month, see which is the most successful social network, and then we'll put all our videos on that too, natively, because that's an extra step. Put it natively on Facebook. That would be one way I would take that information and apply it. That's a really good point, Chris.
A follow-up with that, being able to focus on the audience, if you do cast a wider net with the auto post, you may also be able to get a little bit of insight into which types of your content are more attractive to different platforms. And then if you decided you wanted to actually put some time investment into that, you could make sure that certain categories go to certain platforms or some things like that, where you could kind of customize it that way, at least from that starting information, once you've gotten a little idea about how your content performs.
That's a little bit of foreshadowing on the importance of segmentation. And we're going to have several articles on that coming up shortly. So let's keep on course here and get to the second story, which we have on the Seattle Times hitting 81,000 digital subscribers. Now, one of the most subscribed to news websites in the country. And this is from Press Gazette. The Seattle Times increased their subscriptions 10% in the last year, 2021. But since 2019, they doubled their subscribers. So basically, they saw growth before COVID, but they've been able to keep that going in 2021. That was kind of the story of 2021. I felt like you hear all these year-end stories. A lot of the news organizations and industry publications were saying all subscriptions are down this year. It's okay. Everyone's experiencing the same thing. In this case, maybe they didn't have the same growth as 2021, but they're still on an upward trajectory. And let's see, I think it was the CEO who led this initiative, had a really interesting quote here. And basically, her approach was the growth strategy was focusing on maximizing revenue over subscriber numbers. And the revenue is a target that's based on what it's going to take to operate the newsroom. So let's take a look at this quote. She said, I think this is one of the follies of the industry, this volume chase, because the interview was asking about maximizing subscribers. Strategically, we've looked at this in a very different way, where we talk about sustainability of the size of the newsroom and the dollars that we need to support our long-term strategy. They look at it from a revenue standpoint versus we are chasing this basically arbitrary volume number. Because there are all kinds of terrible things you can do to your long-term viability and sustainability to get to that volume number. This is one specific thing that I can see as a problem. She says that deep discounting, they had to ask themselves, is this strategically the right move in order to grow subscribers, engagement, retain them, and flip them to the high price point? That's the key. You could have a steep discount and have a ton of people sign up for the intro deal, but if they all cancel because it's too much of a disconnect between the intro pricing and the full pricing, then you're going to just see high attrition and you're going to be spending a lot of time chasing those people. Now, that's kind of the opposite to what we've also seen other publications having success with getting their foot in the door, casting a wide net, having the first month completely free. That's obviously as low as you can go, and just get people to sign up, get their email, get them into the system as someone that's interested. That's kind of the other way of looking at this. And the take home lesson here is that you have to look at each publication specifically. You can't just take this model and replicate it everywhere. This model works here for a number of reasons. I think, Tyler, you were mentioning how they see a huge advantage of just covering Seattle.
They were extremely focused on one market, which I think if you are the source for that market, it's a lot easier for you to say, we are the authority on what's happening here.
Right.
Thus, we can charge this much.
To get to that point, $4.99 per week is one of the highest prices in the country for a metro newspaper. It's up there with the Boston Globe, which we commented on a few weeks ago as having the highest price that we had ever seen. I think part of it is that they're coming in with this discount offer just for the first 4 weeks, and then it goes up to $4.99. It's not like they're giving the first 6 months for $1 and then goes from like the lowest price in the country to the highest. It's not as big of a jump. There's a couple things to consider here, but for the local newspaper, it's a smaller difference. If you come in with $1 for the first month and then it renews at $4.99 per month, that's not as much of a leap. So I just don't see you getting as much attrition. It's good news for the industry that someone is getting there by just being the only ones covering certain content in Seattle. If you want to get that information, you got to pay this premium price. So it works for them. And it should work for the local newspaper too, because they're the only ones covering a lot of this stuff. It's interesting that they're focusing on the bottom line revenue. It's not something that a lot of publishers are focused on. They seem to really just focus on subscriber numbers. I think you got to look at both. You can't look at one entirely and ignore the other, but it's just a question of which one do you want to make the actual goal.
Well, Matt, I also noticed this was actually just above the quote that you were reading, is that they are privately owned, which might have something to do with the way that they have freedom, a bit more freedom of choice in how they want to manage their subscription model.
Yeah, I mean, chains, these newspapers owned by venture capital and everything, they're going to be setting the prices. They're going to be disconnected from the community and understanding what kind of price is going to be sustainable there. Nice story from Seattle. Now, to keep on track, let's move to the last one. We got 2 in this category of creating audience segments. This article from What's New in Publishing is talking about growing subscriber revenue by targeting specific audience segments. They talk about a couple things like using qualitative measures like interviews.
Using audience insights to improve engagement. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today we're discussing a piece by Peter Houston over at What's New in Publishing, reporting on targeting strategies by The Atlantic, and a new study on audience segmentation by Juan Ifra. The article, How to Capture and Use Audience Insights to Improve Engagement, looks at how the collection and utilization of these data can increase revenue and engagement. As newsrooms strive to strengthen their digital businesses, it's becoming increasingly clear that the most successful ones start with a focus on the audience's needs and how the newsroom can best serve them through high-quality, digital-first journalism, from understanding your audiences in a deeper way. Juan Ifra. Here are the big takeaways. Both The Atlantic and Juan Ifra's studies show that audience insight is an editorial keystone, guiding publishers in providing the type of content which generates the most engagement. The Atlantic also conducted direct contact interviews, group conversations, surveys, and usability tests as a core source of audience insights. The Juan Ifra report demonstrates that focusing on a small number of specific audience segments sets a publication apart, garnering increased reach and revenue base. Our Hometown provides detailed analytics, newsletter targeting, and tools requesting reader feedback as part of a complete custom WordPress platform for news publishers.
We're talking about some ways that this could actually happen, because a lot of this was done by The Atlantic, which is a huge organization. How do they organize these interviews? How are they funding them? One idea that we were discussing is having the surveys in some type of a live environment, whether it's in person or over Zoom. It just seems like you're going to get more engagement there rather than, right, Chris, you were the one saying this earlier. It makes sense to me, rather than having a poll on the website that's just passively sitting there, or even emailing people directly. You just got to ask yourself, like, what do I do? How many surveys do I answer when they're emailed to me.
With a live audience, they're already there.
Right.
Reason. And so their engagement is already set at a pretty high bar.
That's true.
You can start tossing in these queries, information queries into that target audience that's already there and captured by your live event. That's why I think the engagement is higher in those situations.
Let's get right down to how a local newspaper on WordPress can segment their audience. Concrete things. Right here, you mentioned one. Newsletter targeting. We've got the Today in News Tech newsletter, which is a brand new product, a whole new marketing channel outside of social media. If I go in here and look at automated newsletters, we've got a newsletter going out every week that just pulls the latest articles from the past week and sends them out. So we don't need to take any extra time to do that. We're just publishing every day of the week, and then this goes out on Sunday. But if we look at the 20 newsletters that we've sent at this point, this would be like the main newsletter that you're talking about, Tyler, getting everyone on. And that's your free newsletter sign up that you have on the homepage that sends out teasers every week. The newsletter that everyone that's paying for a subscription automatically gets put on that list. So you've got your active subscribers, expired subscribers, and then your leads, basically the people that have never subscribed, never paid, but they've opted in for the newsletter. So that's got everyone on it. But I think we could drive more engagement if you had that weekly newsletter coming out every Thursday, let's say. Then on Mondays, you introduce sports. Let's say your most popular category on the website is sports, which you could find in the analytics. And you say, okay, we've got the biggest audience on sports. Let's segment that audience and send them more stuff to get them more engaged. So they can always unsubscribe, but this is an opportunity to engage with them more. So what you would do is look at your stats for your latest newsletter. And then you come in here and go to retargeting. This is just retargeting based on whether the newsletter was opened or not. Let's actually back up and look at clicks. Our newsletter is very small. We've only had a couple clicks each week, but for a newspaper, you probably have hundreds of clicks each week. So you could come in here and segment the list. Looking at your newsletter, you would have a section like this for each link. So you could just look at the links and say, okay, this is a sports article. This is the one sports article in the newsletter. We had this many people click on it. Let's put them on the sports newsletter list. So that's how you would do it. Just go into the stats, go to retargeting, and then choose whatever section you're creating this segment on. In this example, it's sports. You would choose any sports related stories and then reassign people that clicked on those links to the sports newsletter. We don't want to keep sending them the same stuff twice a week. So if they click on it in the weekly newsletter, we don't want to send them the same story next week, but they need to be getting more sports content. That would be the idea behind it. So this is not something you just off the cuff. You kind of have to have the strategy behind it. It's got to have a different vibe. Those two newsletters. One is a general purpose, just news update, and one is this highly targeted category newsletter. Think about the types of stories that are going to show up there, how frequently. Maybe you only do the sports newsletter once a month, and it's a bunch of summary articles on what happened. Lots of different ways to approach this, but the bottom line is the more segmenting you can do, the better you're going to have for engagement. Because if you just have one newsletter that treats everyone the same, you might have a decent open rate, but the click rate might start to erode. The way to get that back is to deliver them highly specific content based on their interests. There are other things that we can do. You could create lots of different categories for interests without creating a whole separate newsletter channel. You could still do retargeting sporadically. For example, you could be building an interest list, emails that are interested in sports, saving that list. And then when you have a big sports announcement, focus it on that list. It doesn't necessarily have to be a weekly thing.
We had a couple of publishers that try different things. One of them, they do a weekly newsletter, a daily, and then an event newsletter. And it started out, it was just the weekly newsletter, and it has grown vastly since they started. And then they went to a daily and then the events. Right. And that keeps people engaged with the community. And then we have another publisher that does county related information. They have like 4 counties that they cater to, but the news is different in each one. So they actually have a sign up for each of those counties.
Let's talk real specifically about how she did this. So she started with a generic newsletter, and then went to a daily. Did she just move the whole newsletter audience over to daily, or did she look at the people that were clicking the most and just put them on it?
Yeah, the weekly newsletter was all of her subscribers.
Right.
That was ported over from the other site.
Right.
And then what she did was she looked to see who her power users were, who were clicking actively. And then she basically added a sign up for the daily, who would be interested in a daily or an event. And she collected those emails. So that way she wouldn't have a lot of unsubscribers.
Well, I actually heard two interesting things there that reminded me of this article a little bit. They talked about self-reporting, giving feedback through surveys, but then also automated reporting where you look at the statistics. It sounds like maybe she didn't actually do this, but you could do it two ways. You could have the sign up on your weekly newsletter. You're expanding it to daily, starting weekly. You could have a sign up. We're launching a daily newsletter. Sign up here if you want to hear more from us. That's the opt-in. But then you could also just look at the stats and do the retargeting and just see who are the people that are opening and clicking on this newsletter every week. Let's put them on the power users list. And then you send it to those two lists, the people that directly opted in and the people that were most engaged with the weekly. The thing with newsletter marketing is you just always make it really easy to opt out. If they're already subscribing to a weekly newsletter, it's not that much to just move them over to the daily. Technically, I think if they unsubscribe from any one of your newsletters, they're unsubscribed from the whole thing. So those two techniques were really key because you want to have people be able to opt in, but then we're also kind of doing it for them. Because then if we put them on the daily and they stay on there, that's really where they belong. It would never have happened for some of those people if we required them to opt into the daily. Some people just aren't going to do that.
One other thing about Red Hook, one thing that I thought was really innovative is she actually has a tab where people can send their ideas. And it's not just for articles or coverage, but it's also for the newsletter. That's how the event newsletter came about.
For the events, did she have events in her weekly and daily newsletter that she looked at who was clicking on those and then signed them up for the events newsletter?
I think she did do that. The people that were clicking, I think she did move them over, but she also implemented that tab. So that way, if there were people who were looking for other newsletters, like government coverage for like the local election, schools and the school board and things like that, they can actually request a newsletter just with those articles. She's contemplating that. She actually just recently added obituaries because evidently she got a high request rate for that.
I think a form like this is great to have. I've also seen on the Salt Lake City podcast, they have a phone number where you can just call right from the newsletter. It's like a clickable thing. However, you can do it to make it as easy as possible. You just got to lower that barrier to get any feedback from people. It's kind of a lot to ask, I think, for people to take time out of their day to help you kind of improve your product. Any kind of incentive you can provide, just make it as simple as possible. All right. Now, this last article really ties into that one, audience segmentation and retargeting strategies. This is from, Chris, this is your article from the Search Engine Journal, which is not really a newspaper-specific journal. It's really SEO, but you find a lot of stuff on here that we're able to apply to newspapers. And I don't know if it's always clear, the translation. Just looking at the original article, sometimes it's hard to see. So that's our job, is to make the connection and show you exactly how you can do this retargeting. Because a lot of this stuff they're talking about in here is fairly sophisticated, and a lot of it is for retargeting e-commerce and stuff like that.
Audience segmentation and creative retargeting strategies. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today we're highlighting a piece by Andrea Azzori over at Search Engine Journal about how publishers can improve engagement with audience retargeting. The article, 7 Ways to Segment Your Audience for Successful Retargeting, provides several approaches to audience segmentation through analytics, marketing campaigns, and contextual insights. Too often, advertisers create a one-size-fits-all retargeting strategy that doesn't acknowledge any of the information they have about the users and how they have interacted with the brand, says Azzori. Here are the big takeaways. Retargeting campaigns can be used across networks and channels by basing an advertising audience on outside traffic sources, for instance, visitors to your YouTube channel who came from Facebook. Using a storytelling strategy through a series of ads also provides audience segments that feed into each other as users engage with individual ads in the sequence. Targeting life events through search criteria is an extremely effective method to create new audiences and personalize marketing content. Website search usage is another valuable source of information for segmentation. Audiences can be generated from site analytics to target users who have used a site's search functionality, but have yet to be converted. At our hometown, customers have access to extensive tools for analytics, ad network targeting, and sophisticated newsletter generation to tailor audience outreach and increase engagement.
So let's break these down one at a time, these four big takeaways. This quote was funny to me. Too often, advertisers create a one-size-fits-all retargeting strategy. Like, let's talk about one specific retargeting tool, which is Pixel on Facebook. Some background on that. Pixel is some code that you can put on your website that will put a cookie on the user's browser and then continue to show them ads for you as they go back on Facebook. So that's specifically for Facebook. There's other retargeting tools with other platforms, but that's how it works there. So a generic retargeting strategy would be put the pixel on the homepage and just send them, please subscribe ads on Facebook. I think what they're talking about here is doing something a little bit more granular. Tyler, let's talk to you about this because you set up the pixel for audio articles. So can you tell us a little bit about how a newspaper might use Pixel to create more segmentation?
Like you said, I think the more general approach is just to have the pixel on the page and say, did they view the page? If they did, send them all of our ads.
Right.
But the thing that Pixel does that I find so useful is you can track individual events and types of events throughout your entire site. So as long as the pixel's on your site, you can track who has viewed what page, what section of the page they viewed, have they clicked a button, have they filled out a form. As specific actions combine, you can use those actions to build audience profiles essentially. And so you can target everyone that has clicked a subscribe button or everyone that has filled out your form.
And that's a perfect example. Let's just give our audience one thing that they can take away from this article. I think it would be, if the end goal is to convert to paid subscribers, you could have a pixel on your subscribe page and then a second tracking event for your pixel on the checkout page where the confirmation that the order has been placed, right?
While you're talking about the confirmation page, I would have two events on that confirmation page, one for viewing the page itself and one for actually hitting submit.
So you can really get to that level of detail. That's very cool. You mentioned that you like the interface, so I just thought I'd bring it up. Is there anything you want to show?
Scroll down a little further under that graph there is where I think they're really useful. So this shows individual events and actions that are happening and how many people are doing them. And if you expand, it'll go into further detail. I think I've tracked 3 pages actually. So this is on the audio articles page, the home page, and our contact form.
What are subscribe and lead? Are these just default things?
Yeah, these are all default titles that I've just kind of tried to assign to buttons that make the most sense.
Gotcha.
So almost all of these are either clicking on links or buttons. I think the only thing you can do on the page level is that view content, but then you can tag every single clickable item on your website with the pixel and assign each of those to whatever action you want them to represent.
So this is obviously a very powerful tool, but the thing we always need to caution the audience is that this is fully controlled and dependent on Facebook, which is just something to be aware of. Very powerful, but you also don't really have any of this data. You don't have access to it. You cannot go in and say, this person did this thing on my page. They keep that all behind the scenes.
And on that same line, the problem with this data is it can only be used to retarget on Facebook.
So it's all controlled by Facebook, and the whole retargeting experience is only going to be happening on Facebook, not as they go around the internet and things. You would need another retargeting tool for that. That's a nice overview there. Let's wrap it up by looking at how you can segment with a newsletter. I pretty much talked about this already. You could create a system that allows the audience to self-segment with just a little bit of input from you. Again, to review that, create a generic newsletter. Everyone needs at least a high-level weekly newsletter for their paper that has the top headlines in it. Then you can allow people to self-segment by saying, we have a new newsletter that's covering these sections in more detail every week. Sign up here. Allow them to opt in that way, but then you can further segment the audience without them opting in by just looking at the metrics and retargeting to the different lists. So you can create any number of lists on the website that are lists of emails, and those are your segments. And you can assign emails to those lists with the retargeting tool in the newsletter. So just by looking at what links were clicked, you can reassign everyone that clicked on that link to a certain category. And then you really own all the information. You have an email and you have these interest tags on them that say, this email is interested in these categories. And you can do all kinds of stuff with this. But the most practical thing is to just create a new newsletter vertical that just has content from that category. And I think it would work because usually in the weekly newsletter, it's not showing everything. It's just the top 3 or 4 stories from each category. If you've got 5 or 6 stories each week on sports, that sports newsletter would have everything. Think about what is the design of the generic newsletter. You almost have to design that at the same time that you're designing the segments, because you don't want them to be too alike. So maybe you take it down to 2 teasers from each category. If people click on each of those 2 teasers, well, they're very interested in that category, we should put them on that segment.
Related to that is, if a publisher can segment this out and does get some traction with these category-based subsegments, then of course that lends itself to retargeting of which advertisers appear on those letters as well.
Sure.
So of revenue generating side to that as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I think all of our publishers are going to love that. That's why I think publishers are drawn to the idea of creating a new newsletter, because it's just a new place to put an ad. But if this is going to be a specific audience, you really got to think about that audience and think about the ad that's going to go in there in the same way that you think about the content. It's got to all serve them. It's got to be a benefit, like this is a service that they're signing up for that they could opt out at any time. So I would say you don't want to create a segment that you're just going to send ads to. Make the ads match the content. So if it's a sports email, have it the local sports equipment store or something, sponsor it. Whatever you can do to make it sync up and just feel more natural. Great point, Chris. Appreciate that. All right. Sounds good, guys. We'll talk to you later. Have a good afternoon.
See ya.
Thanks all.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
See ya. Thanks for watching Today in News Tech, the podcast on innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.